Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Randy Baier. Today we'll talk about books we received for review, including a book on modern poets, a book on Barack Obama and Defining Moment, reading, green industries, and the physics of playing hockey. Welcome to Rip Rap, Randy.
Thanks, glad to be here. It seems like Obama is always in a defining moment. I mean, ever since his audacity of hope, it's a constant defining moment.
Yeah, it's and indeed that's true, because now we have another president. This is on the original presidential candidacy, but it does apply to this now. I mean, this country is just starting to work its way out of the mess that he inherited, and it's just catastrophic. I mean, we're technically bankrupt as a country now, because they're talking about having to go to a debt of 16 trillion, and we have like 14.5 trillion assets, which I think is the technical thing.
Right.
But I like the way of reflecting on this whole thing. And one of the issues is the landscape of race in the 21st century. And it's still coming out. It's just amazing. Old habits die really hard, and some people have been, even on the campaign trail, are still. I mean, there was a question of Rick Santorum saying that Barack Obama was an avowed Muslim, which he is not. You know, this.
Did Santorum actually say that?
No, a question came from the audience.
Oh,
and the woman said that, and instead of rebutting her,
right,
he just said, "Well, I'm trying very hard to defeat him." I mean, he didn't rebut.
Right, he didn't
which
say,
is
"Hold
an
on, let's
implicit
draw
kind
a line
of,
in the sand here."
Implicit kind of racism kind of
right,
thing.
I see what you're saying.
And there's still people who, I got a posting on Facebook to me from one of my high school colleagues, you know, with all that birther nonsense that he wasn't really born in. And so I sent a message back to the person on Facebook saying, Bill, I thought you were a rational person, and you know that you would never indulge yourself in this kind of rant. So then he overwhelmed me with all this patriotic, right-wing, religious nonsense.
You got what you asked for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, is this person a reading person? I mean, is he a teacher or something? What
no, this was from a high school.
Yeah. I mean, what does he do
I don't
now?
know what he does now, but thinking is not the top of his priorities.
He went down the other path. Yeah.
But it
is interesting how we've gotten into. You mentioned the prejudice against Muslims and the birther controversy with President Obama, but also the implicit or not so implicit situation of race and minority rights and equality in our own country. It has increased difficulties for Latinos, for African Americans, for various other immigrant groups, I guess. Well, the Latino immigrant group. I mean, I'm putting the immigrant in, not to say those other minorities are immigrants. I sort of jumbled three things together there, but yeah, it's a crisis. I liked what Obama has said about trying to fix or confront the issue with the legacy of this, what's called the illegal immigration or minority issues. I mean, he seems to be taking the things that can be solved and working on them, such as this issue of immigrant children who were born in the States. Their parents may be illegal, technically illegal, but they've now grown up in America. They've been going to schools, and they represent an American population. That seems fixable to me. The question of how do you make the definition of who's illegal and not, do we send the parents back, all that's really thick. That's
Do you
deep.
send grandparents back who have been living here? Do you send babies back, without their parents? I mean, or send the parents back and leave the babies here? It's really a troubling thing, but it's also the kind of discourse that emerges in a post-empire country, nation state like the United States.
It's like it's
scrabbling over the crumbs off the table.
Right.
But one of the interesting,
Fear
this
of
book
the
is by
outsider.
Enid Logan, who's associate professor of sociology, University of Minnesota. But what do you call this area of awareness? She calls it post-race American triumphalism and the entrenchment of colorblind racial ideology. I don't know what that is,
Wow.
but it sure is an interesting thing. Where are we with this?
She's saying that there is a time when things can be post-race.
Well, that's what people would like to believe.
Yeah,
is that now, because Barack Obama got elected, that we've worked past it.
People are just judged on their own merits, and certainly not due to the overlay of social structure and.
And I'm not so sure that you can argue that we're in a post-racial age.
Well, it sounds like she wants it to be.
Yeah,
she's saying, let's work towards this or something. Yeah.
Pointing out the possibilities.
Well, was it post-triumphalism or triumphalism?
Post-race American triumphalism.
American triumphalism, okay.
Only sociologists.
I hope the triumphalism is fleshed out. I mean, it sounds like that.
It says the narrative of post-race America is a 21st century version of American triumphalism. That we can just work past things.
We can get through this.
We can get through this, but from what I've been seeing, it's not happening.
There are so many euphemisms that work against our daily. This thing that you mentioned about Santorum, where he didn't just confront the person and say, "Wait a minute, what you said was incorrect. I'm here trying to win, but let's draw the line in the sand here. What you said about Muslims was wrong. We can't go there." But there are so many euphemisms for sort of racial categories that go on just in our daily language. So it seems like if we're going to reach this triumphalism, we have to get over stereotypes like saying, "Well, we're very concerned about our urban students." I mean, that means our black students, basically. But actually, if you look at, as the sociologist is, if you look at the statistics, there's so much subtlety into these issues. I mean, we do have students from urban environments who are black or Latino or poor white or whatever, who are suffering because their education is not up to speed with some of the others. Say the whole difference between suburban and city schools. But these are not problems that you just say city, suburb, city, suburb. There's a lot of subtlety within that.
Well, and people speak in code, and that's what the really troubling thing is.
Yeah.
When I went down to Alabama in 1968 in the heat of racial tensions, I thought there'd be a much more obvious indications of racism in Alabama. That's not what I found. What I found is the code. Like I watched the 11 o'clock news, and you had to decode. There was embedded within that. There were all these allusions that when you translated them out, it was very racist.
Yeah.
But then I was surprised I came back here and started looking for the code, and
it's here too.
It's here too.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you get to this triumphalism? I guess that means American values can overcome,
Right. It's the whole thing that you can
problem.
overcome deficits.
Right.
And I don't know, but I think that what is helpful, like she was saying about Etienne Balibar, the French philosopher, the whole discourse of race and nation are never far apart. But I think that by changing the discourse, which is what Barack Obama has done, that can lead to change. But I don't know how far along we are. The fact that he got elected, I think that's what she's saying, that it indicates that there was some kind of victory and sense of looking past race.
Yeah.
Just like looking past, Catholicism for John Kennedy. And I think that is true, but how deeply embedded is it? Because she also talks about, the issues of Asian Latino voters. And the other thing about race is like Newt Gingrich, one of the presidential candidates, keeps calling Barack Obama the food stamp president. And that's similar to the, the students who are challenged kind of thing. It's a way of labeling them in a very racist way, so.
He opposes the food checks to the paycheck. The food stamps to the paycheck. I heard that laid out, and it actually reminded me of one of President Bush's advisors, Karl Rove, in the use of language, the way that a concept can be cleverly encapsulated. So I heard Gingrich speaking about the food stamp president, and he's weighing these things, and he's basically saying, do you want a handout or do you want to earn your own living? Do you want to have pride of self and work and put in your time and grow your country, or do you just want a handout and have everything given to you? So do you want food stamps or do you want a paycheck? Do you want X or do you want this? Do you want to learn and put in the time to learn, or do you want someone to pass you in school and pass you up to the next level and not really have you accountable? And he's making it so entirely black and white that it was all I could do was admire the rhetoric of it, because it was based
The cleverness.
yeah, it was clever, because it's sort of like it's either this or that, and that's not the way these issues play out.
That is Newt Gingrich's singular quality, is being able to simplify things and to attack. And I was reading an article in the news media last day or so that's what he was known for when he was Speaker of the House. In fact, his viciousness and the rhetoric that he used was taught to other Republican candidates because it seemed to win.
Yeah, but you have to have his personality in order to pull
and
it
the
off.
intellect, and the intellect to pull it
The
off.
quickness, right.
And the author of this book, Enid Logan, talks about Sarah Palin at an October 2008 rally, and she brought up, this is where we find the goodness and kindness and the courage of everyday Americans. She's not referring to diversity. She's referring to her own segment and what they see as good. Those who are running our factories and teaching our kids and growing our food and fighting our wars for us, those who are protecting us in uniform. That's where the rub comes in, and that the language is still, there. And she still reappears from time to time. She was defending, Newt Gingrich. But maybe, my hope is, along with the author of this book, Enid Logan, that maybe we might find a way of dealing with race in a more informed manner. And that people who are marginalized won't stay that way, and that they'll be brought into the mainstream and respected. But like she says, Barack Obama helped to create a space for new conceptions of a national identity and a new kind of racial politics. But we must continue to push that space open much farther. And it's distressing to see how there is still this residual thing that people are not changing the discourse, and now they're rejecting it just outright. So
Yeah.
that was one of those things. I've got this book here on the great modern poets, which is fascinating because it's what's underneath all this is not necessarily the discourse within the book, but what it took to put it together. And it's also fascinating because as a CD, which is kind of a modern publishing thing, of the poets reading their own work.
That's the value, great value to hear the
Right.
actual live poetry. So now tell me something about the difficulty of pulling this together. Are you talking simply about the choice?
Yeah,
of
which ones do you
which
select?
to put in? I suppose well, let me ask you this: was this designed as a sort of a thinking person's coffee table book, or is it something you would have in a class on poetry, a seminar on poetry?
Well, I think
how is it
it
designed?
functions several different ways. One is I think people might enjoy having it. It's wonderful to hear Dylan Thomas reading "Do Not Go Gently Into That Good Night." I think it's also a great teaching tool because there's an entire difference in listening to a poet read his or her work.
Well, I know I have in my head T.S. Eliot reading the Prufrock, J. Alfred Prufrock love song, and the women come and go, speaking of Michelangelo.
That's true.
But it actually resonates. I mean, it kind of gives it a quality of not only his personality, but it's infusing the idea with sound. which is so critical to
You
poetry.
hear the poet's soul.
Yeah.
When,
Yeah.
when he or she reads, you hear the
Right.
soul.
You hope
You're not
so.
just reading
Right.
it.
That's true. Right.
And I think it'd be valuable in like speech classes to,
It's
to
really,
hear it.
it's interesting how some poets are so, when they read, they're so animated, they read the poem as a story, and others have almost a stereotypical sing-song quality to the way they read. I always like, one of my favorite poets is as a reader, as a narrative, is Allen Ginsberg, because he's so animated. It's almost like it's a conversation with his poem, and it's inflected so that the meaning, he brings out the meanings of the words.
He's there.
He's right there. He's definitely present. And I would love, I think Walt Whitman was recorded reading some of his verse in the very, very, last years of his life. I think I've heard something about that, but I would love to hear Walt Whitman. It just would be great to hear. You think of the old, or Emily Dickinson, to hear their voices would be really, really special.
It's just an entirely, and you're, as someone who's interested in media, when you hear the person's voice, there's just another dimension.
It makes all the difference.
It's like 3D kind of thing.
It's
it's there.
Well, it's fun. I mean, we're talking about the choice of, I guess you'd say, famous poems or momentous poems of the works of all these people, but touching on sound and the notion of the voice, people do very interesting things. They'll keep voice messages, for instance, especially say parents or friends who have passed away, and they'll keep the voice messages and things of that nature. These keepsakes that we now have, oral keepsakes. The possibility of since we've gone 120 years now with recording technology or more.
Doesn't NPR have that stories of, what do they call it?
They have some historical. Well, actually, yes,
gathering stories from
the StoryCorps
Yeah.
that they do. But the BBC has a big archive of historical sound, and of course there are archives all over the world, especially of poets reading. This maybe for our listeners or our watchers, that just the reading of who's in this anthology, it really does cover the 20th century and early 21st century. W.H. Auden, Alan Tate, Langston Hughes, E.E. Cummings, Marianne Moore, Charlotte Mew, Robert Lowell, Dylan Thomas, Philip Larkin, Thomas Kinsella, Adrian Rich, Ted Hughes, Sylvia Plath, Seamus Haney, Elizabeth Bishop.
But who's missing?
Well, that's your question. You're a literature
What's
person.
missing are all the other voices in the global environment of poetry, Asian, Latin American, where are they? And I want to hear their voices too.
So why do you think the choice was to go with the sort of Euro-American?
Well, see, that's
Derek Walcott is in here, but
Yeah.
The Euro-American sort of background. Why do you think that
Well, because of the bias in the publishing industry of what will sell. And so, and I think a certain amount of ignorance. I just don't think they really have listened to Pablo Neruda or Eduardo Galeano.
Or Japanese poets, for that matter.
Yeah.
The great traditions of
Lee
haiku.
Poe. And, even though some Americans like Robert Haas have studied them, at length.
Yeah.
But that's always what bothers me about this book. Here you have the immediacy of these very vibrant personalities reading their works.
Yeah.
But I'm missing the rest of the voices.
Which is so rich and so satisfying and knowledgeable and enriching, and yet there's a whole other aspect that's missing.
And that's what I always have trouble about how literature is taught in the school.
Yeah.
And so the students also don't feel, maybe if they come from other backgrounds, if they come from Algeria or Africa or like Somalia or Indonesia or Vietnam, or China, they're not getting any resonance to this exercise of
Yeah.
looking at the
We
world
could have
itself.
a very interesting reverse issue, whereas the meaning in sort of Western or common sort of Euro-American traditional terms would maybe not translate so directly, which is the I don't know what do you call that, reverse Occidentalism? I don't know.
Orientalism.
Reverse
The reverse
Orientalism.
of Orientalism.
Right. But I mean that touches on a couple of interesting problems. I mean, I have two questions about this. One is the whole argument about the canon, the Western canon. So the Western canon aficionados, those who will support the Western canon, or I think what they're saying is, okay, you're in this culture, learn the historical roots of Greek, Roman, Spanish, Mediterranean. Learn the great canonical works of this. Within those works, the Iliad, or the Chanson of France, or whatever, Chaucer. Within those works is the world. The world is in those works.
Yeah.
The wife of Bath could be anybody around the world, right? So I think that's what the canon people, the Western canon protectors, are saying. And one could say from the Mahabharata, if you were talking canonical works or whatever, you take great works from Japan or Africa or India, one could say in the Mahabharata is the world. The world, everything that will happen in terms of emotion, human feeling, passion, it's all there in that work. It's non-Western, but it's all there. So if you're growing up, Hindu, or you're growing up in India or in Africa, and you have these traditions of either oral traditions or written traditions, that trains you for your life. That seems to be what the canonical people are arguing.
I've never accepted that, because to me that's like monolingualism.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you only know your own culture,
Right,
you're not able to
There's
think
enough.
past it. And one of the most profound moments I had as undergraduate, and this is during the Vietnam War,
Mhm.
is when a poet from Vietnam came and performed in a coffee shop in East Lansing, singing in Vietnamese.
Mhm.
And then they had a translation, but it was beautiful.
yeah, right.
And it brought out a whole nother sense. I mean, he was protesting the war, but it was also the pain and the anguish of the people living there who were just being bombed into oblivion, of trying to point out the other side of it, but in a different way. And that's what I think we miss, because we need to be more multilingual or multicultural or multi-discourses in order to fully understand ourselves and get a better understanding of the world. And so there's these anthologies are easy to put together in a way. I mean, they did a pretty good job at getting the standard fare, but still it's biased in favor of white males who lived, 30, 40 years ago? Because they're known, and they're studied, and people have to know them.
Well, that's true. I mean, no one knows in some way unless you deeply study. Right off the surface, Allen Ginsberg, famous poet. But I mean, in his time, he was breaking down, Elizabeth Bishop, Sylvia Plath, they were breaking down walls in their particular time, and they've now become, the sort of the pillars of culture, literary culture, but they were really breaking things, challenging, just the way, say, the Impressionists challenged, painting culture in 1870 or whatever. There was a time when they weren't the canon, and they were, and within their own culture, they were doing something.
That's what I want. I want to go back more, I want to have everyone, including students, struggling more to listen to the voices that are there.
Mm-hmm.
Not just the ones that have a stamp of approval, this is okay,
Yes, right.
This is good,
Right.
whatever that is.
This is good.
But I want them to be listening to discern what is stuff that responds to them, that extends their awareness of their environment and their self and their family and their culture. And also, it's sad when someone doesn't find the resonance in the canon for their experience. And there's been a lot of research about that, because if you come from another country, you're not going to find the
Right.
same kind of thing that you need to hear.
You won't
and
necessarily
reflect
understand the
extend
subtext.
your- and-
Yeah. Or the
I mean,
conventions.
there's a lot of literature about the difference in expectation, the whole philosophical, ethical, cultural viewpoint that you have as an Asian versus an American. It's two different kinds of societies. And the approach toward culture is different. I mean, you've studied in Indonesia.
Oh, I mean, I'm in complete agreement with you. The other thing about the cross-cultural, the value of confronting, another way of thinking or seeing or hearing or writing is, in a sense, the impossibility of translation, and yet you have to struggle to try to understand it. And, I mean, ultimately, I like to say, Martha Stewart will take a rock and make her own soil, right, to grow her highly precious,
very fashionable.
fashionable creations. Well, okay, I could go and learn Japanese. How am I supposed to totally understand haiku poetry unless I really understand Japanese language from the core and Japanese culture? So there's that continuum. I could go that far, grind up the rock and make my own soil. But there is an approach. I mean, speaking of haiku, I remember learning or confronting, haiku poetry for the first time, and being so enthralled by the rule. You get whatever it is, 5, 7, 5 syllables. You got
17 syllables.
17
That's
syllables
it. No more.
to express an idea, and the idea has to be cogent within itself and have some sort of
It has to
natural.
evoke all the senses
Exactly.
within 17 syllables. Though one of the most famous is Li Po's poem about the frog on a pad, on a pond.
Mhm.
And all it is the frog jumping into the pond. But there's a visual, there's a sound, there's the motion,
Yeah,
there's a tactile sense.
right.
But 17 syllables, I think it's just absolutely intriguing that within that short of a space,
That's,
you can evoke.
you see, that changes your complete perception of things.
Well, we did another riprap, believe it or not.
We did. This was fascinating.
Yeah.
We had 20 books and got through 4.
Yeah.
That's about typical for us.
Well, thank you for being a riprap.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here, and we're continuing the program. So
Yeah. Good.
great. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having me, Jim.